Nobody made fun of these stories because everyone at least knew someone who had seen something spooky going on after nightfall. The most famous of these legends was the ghost of Sleepy Hollow, called by some the Headless Horseman. This goblin was said to appear at night riding an enormous fiery horse, holding his head on his saddle and chasing unfortunate travelers to their doom. The only place the horseman could not venture was across a bridge that led to the little white church, and every child in Sleepy Hollow knew that that church was the only place you could really be safe from such a dreadful monster. One day, while teaching school, a young boy ran up to the schoolhouse to deliver an invitation to Ichabod. It was for a party that night at the house of none other than Katrina Van Tassel and her parents. Ichabod was so excited, he was beside himself. He let the students go home early and spent hours combing his hair and arranging his necktie at the perfect angle to impress Katrina.
Tonight she will fall in love with me, she will.
Ichabod borrowed an old horse from a neighbor and set out for the party. It was a beautiful evening, and it seemed to Ichabod that the birds and the insects were all singing to him, calling, "Katrina, Katrina." Obviously, he was beyond help. And when someone is that much in love, something unfortunate is bound to happen. Ichabod arrived at the party only to be laughed at by none other than Brom Bones and his friends, who were already standing on the porch.
Hey, look at that rickety old thing. Is that a horse or a broomstick?
Ichabod held his head high and went inside, but things only went from bad to worse. Katrina hardly looked at him all night. He quietly followed her around the party, and finally, once they were alone, standing next to a table of all sorts of delectable foods. Ichabod gazed at her, and suddenly she looked at him. She was smiling. Ichabod was in heaven.
Excuse me. You have lemon cream pie on your nose.
Yeah, oh, well. Katrina, will you marry me? But it was too late. She was gone. Ichabod could have died with embarrassment. Sadly, he decided there was no reason to stay any longer. He couldn't bear the thought of Katrina laughing at him. He stood on the porch for a while, listening to the villagers tell tales of ghosts and witches, until he was not only sad, but terrified, and then resolved to go home. Ichabod unhitched his old horse and headed down the lane. It was dark, and the sounds of the forest were eerie. Branches creaked, owls hooted, the trees and birds no longer seemed friendly and welcoming. Now trees were huge, looming shadows, and the birds like terrible, shrieking, unseen monsters. Ichabod tried to remain calm, whistling to himself as he rode. Even the horse seemed frightened. Ichabod could feel the animal trembling underneath him. Of course, it could have been just old age, Ichabod told himself. But what if the horse collapsed right here and decided to die, leaving Ichabod stranded? He decided not to think about the horse or anything else. He would just concentrate on making it home. Suddenly, in front of him, Ichabod saw a dark shadow flash between the trees. A deer, he thought quickly. A tree branch caught his coat as he went by, and Ichabod couldn't help it. He gave a little scream. Just then, an enormous dark figure bounded into the road just in front of him. Ichabod's next scream was caught in his throat. He couldn't make a sound. He could see the outline of a figure against the sky, the outline of a huge man on a horse, and where his head should have been, there was nothing. Ichabod frantically kicked at his steed, hoping to bound past the horseman. Then the chase began. The rickety old horse, just as terrified as his rider, galloped faster than he ever had in his life. But the horseman kept up. Ichabod could hear the snorting of the enormous black horse just behind him. Faster and faster. He could almost feel the animal's breath on his back, but he didn't dare turn around to look at the evil creature chasing him. On they rode through the forest, crashing into tree branches and over rocks until Ichabod saw the shape of a covered bridge up ahead. It was the bridge to the church. If only he could make it in time. Ichabod turned once and saw the terrible horseman only a few feet behind him, and he heard a crazed howl. From where? The head on the saddle? He couldn't see the head now, but it didn't matter. He was almost to the bridge, almost to safety. He had reached it. He felt his horse's legs nearly buckling beneath him as they galloped across the wooden planks. On the other side, breathless, they turned to look back. Across the bridge, the horseman and his steed reared up angrily, and just as Ichabod heaved a sigh of relief, the ghost picked up his own head and hurled it straight at Ichabod. The next morning, the rickety old horse was found contentedly grazing in a neighbor's pasture. Ichabod's hat lay trampled next to the old bridge, and a shattered pumpkin beside it. But there was no trace of the schoolteacher. Brombones laughed heartily when he heard the story, but to this day, the villagers tell of the night that poor Ichabod Crane was spirited away by the headless horseman, the ghost of Sleepy Hollow.
Whoa, poor Ichabod. Tell us another one, Uncle Guts.
All right. Here's one you might recognize. Not so long ago, in a small town in Germany, there lived a young scientist by the name of Victor Frankenstein.
I heard of him.
Young Victor was bold and brilliant in science and mathematics, but there was one obsession to which he devoted all his time and energy: creating life. My ultimate project, the thing that gives my life meaning. I will take an inanimate object and infuse it with that mysterious spark of life. I must do it. I must. From the time he conceived the idea, Victor could not start small with an insect or a rat. Oh, no. He had to create the most magnificent, complicated creature of all, a man. Oh, yes, the perfect specimen. What a beautiful creature he will be. But how to find the body? There must be a way. The doctor could come up with no easy solution to his problem. Where did one find dead bodies, after all? In morgues, in graveyards, in medical laboratories, but no one would willingly just give him a body for experimentation. Victor lay awake at night, racked by guilt at the thoughts that were coming to his mind. Somehow, he convinced himself that it was all in the name of science, and finally, one night, he set out on his mission. Night after night, like a thief, he haunted graveyards, dug up freshly buried bodies, and took pieces from each one. He stole into a medical school and carefully took pieces he needed from several bodies, hoping no one would notice much the next morning. Little by little, he patched together a monstrous creature. It was enormous in size, taller than any natural human, with a huge misshapen head and limbs that didn't seem to quite fit together.